So today's topic will be about city life, urban impacts, and so on and so forth. But we basically have discussed many things on the sidelines about how we are approaching things, and now we have our community group where we kind of share a lot of insights that we don't share anywhere else. And you have taken up a project to build a house. So tell more about that before we start digging into everything that we actually want to discuss in details today.
Yeah. So for health reasons, right? I ended up selling my house a year ago, living in a city, right? Not a big city, but inside of a city, right? Like definitely lots of cell phone towers around, lots of power wires, et cetera, all of these things, right? And the reason why I ended up selling my house is I had a cell phone tower built right in my backyard, right? And it was affecting my health and my wife's health and my children's health. So we got it assessed. We got a building biologist to come out and assess the home. And essentially, it came out that we were being irradiated with like 100,000 to 180,000 microwatts per meter squared. And if you tune that down to watts, that's 1 watt to 1.8 watts of power in the house all the time. So think of it like a microwave, right? If you have 1,000 watt microwave, there's 1,000 watts inside the microwave. We had 1 watt all the time, 24/7 inside our house, right? So it's basically like we were on
Like
defrost.
every room?
Every room. Yep.
Wow. Okay. Because I've
Yeah.
seen more, but it's more like in an office setting because obviously we could go and test all that, but never that it would affect every single room. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
the cell phone tower was really close. Like I could walk into my backyard and I could throw a rock and hit the thing, right? Like that's how close it was. It was less than 100 yards, so
Wow.
less than 100 meters of distance between it and my house. So yeah, the whole house. There were parts of my house that were way worse. They were like in the 200,000 microwatt range. And in the basement, it was the lowest because obviously it's in the ground, and that was around 80,000, so a little under 1 watt.
That's
So yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. So I sold the house a year ago, and now, almost a year later, I am going to be building a new home out in a rural area. So about 30 miles outside of the closest city. And there are reasons for that, right? The reasons for that are health related, and we'll discuss, all the different ins and outs of how living inside of a city are going to affect a lot of things in your biology, right? But at the end of the day, what the main concept is what does this have to do with like training and nutrition and body composition and all of these? And this is more in turn relatable to anybody who's started this journey and has never actually executed it from start to finish. So anybody that's new to doing something new, it's almost always going to come down to like a handful of things that you have to do every single day without question, perpetually for like a year or longer. Like that's just the reality, right? A lot of those are the things that we talk about in here, right? Like getting a lot of activity outside, getting your nutrition on point with where you live and your particular training regime, etc. Once you dial those in, you don't change them, right? And it just becomes boring. It just becomes repetitive. And that is when you know you're doing things right. When your body is staying stable and you're doing the same thing over and over and over. And next thing you know, 2 months later, you go, oh, wow, I've changed, right? And then 2 months later after that, you've changed some more. And it's because you've been consistently hammering the right thing over and over and over, no matter how boring it is. But getting somebody on the other side of the conversation, your coach to be specific, to tell you exactly what that handful of really boring things that you're going to have to do every day that's step one, right? Getting somebody on the other side that knows what they're talking about and isn't trying to sell you any kind of gimmick or any kind of supplement. Doesn't mean that there isn't supplements involved. I mean, some people won't need them. And if you're looking for that, well, now you're just wasting time. And some people will only need a certain supplement, but there's a whole industry trying to sell you every supplement, right? Like that's what you got to understand, that most of the stuff that people are trying to sell you is bullshit. there's a few things here and there in unique situations that will help you, right? But it's honestly, it's you can fit them in one hand. It's like 6 items, right? 6 items, and that's about it. Um, and then the other stuff is just boring. The other stuff is just boring. You're going to get sick of going to the gym and doing exactly what you need to do, or you're going to get sick of, hey, I have to get up in the morning and go for a walk every single day without question, right? But
It's like
those start to form,
or
like
mutual
we
friend.
talked about.
Andy Triana once said, "Doing the boring thing is a badge of honor. That's how you get excellent."
Yes, that's exactly right. And it goes, and, and there's biological and physiological processes with doing that, especially if it's something that becomes so boring that you don't want to do it. We had an episode on that where you literally, every time you do something that you don't necessarily want to do, it grows volition. It grows the part of your brain that gives you resiliency, right? And when you build enough resiliency, you get really bold. You get bold enough to do things that you've never done before. Have I ever built a house before? Absolutely not. I've never built a house before. I'm going to be building a house. I've already started on the certain steps, and I'm going to be vlogging it in our school group, in our private group, for people to realize that these applications of really boring things that I do every single day are not just for health. They are not just for building muscle. They're not just for losing body fat. They can be applied to building a business. They can be applied to becoming a better employee if that's what you want. They can be applied to doing something you've never done, like building a house before, your own house, right? And the reasons why I'm capable of building the house is, number one, resiliency. Number two, the ability to think right? And these are some of the things that get affected when you're living inside of a city, and we'll talk about those here shortly. But that's step one.
The
Go
most
ahead.
important that we both know, and you mentioned before we started recording, is clear vision.
Correct. Right. And that was something that I posted in the group just yesterday in a message for everybody in the group is, hey, no matter what it is, whether you're trying to lose fat, whether you're trying to gain muscle, whether you're trying to amplify your business or whatever it is, it starts with a clear vision, right? But you can't have clear visions. You will vacillate more when dopamine isn't working correctly. You won't see trends very well when noradrenaline and adrenaline and dopamine are not in sync. Right. And the reason why I bring those up, those neurotransmitters, is because they are what actually create your ability to interact with pattern recognition. And pattern recognition is not just numbers and letters. It's everything that affects us as humans. What's being said on the media, what's being said by the doctor, what's being said by your personal trainer, what's going on in finances, what's going on in the housing market. All of these are patterns, right? Because all of them involve other human beings. Right? This is what you got to understand. Everything that you ever interact with that's on a digital device is designed by a human. Everything, right? So when you start to understand pattern recognition and how those are deeply related to neurotransmitters like dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, and we have an episode specifically related to mental health and how sunlight creates dopamine, melanin, adrenaline, and noradrenaline from sunlight, from the amino acids beta alanine, and tyrosine are the backbones to create all of that. And they start with getting a lot of sunlight and not having a hypoxic situation, because they go backwards, right? You can turn dopamine you can turn melanin and dopamine into thyroid. You can turn melanin into dopamine and dopamine into noradrenaline if you're hypoxic. In other words, if you're under stress, you can use the end products that make you smarter and better at pattern recognition to keep you surviving from a metabolism standpoint. That hypoxic event is what was happening to me at the cell phone tower, right? So when you are interacted with by electromagnetic fields, you no longer can create dopamine, noradrenaline, and adrenaline appropriately. You can't even make melanin. That's why one of the main symptoms that we talked about way early in our series tanning. The ability to tan is a key indicator if you're being acted upon inappropriately by your environment, because that signals a hypoxic state. It could be a cell phone tower, it could be your Wi-Fi router, it could be the workplace or the shift work that you work, right? If you work night shift, you're chronically awake in a hypoxic environment, you're not going to be able to tan. When you go outside, you'll just burn and you won't tan ever. That's because you are chronically hypoxic, and it's impossible for those two amino acids to be turned into melanin, dopamine, and noradrenaline. That's going to not just affect your ability to tan, it's going to affect your ability to think and recognize pattern recognition and have the volition to act, right? Tying this back together with like health and nutrition, right? When somebody hires a coach, you or me or anything like that, we've had a lot of experience with this. We can tell you exactly what to do, right? We can look at your day and we can be like, hey, at this point in time during the day, do this. At this point in time in the day, do this. At this point in time in the day, eat this type of meal. We can lay that all out, but you still have to do it. You still have to execute on it. And it's one thing to just say, yeah, I'll do it. But I see it all the time, especially when people are in a hypoxic state and they just can't clearly think well. Because when you're low in dopamine, you start dopamine seeking, right? So then the boring thing that I'm having you wanting you to do becomes even less appealing, right? And then I get a message from you, on our weekly check-in and it goes something like this every time. It goes, yeah, I was going to eat that meal that you told me that I needed to eat, but I was just not feeling it. So I ended up eating that, but only about halfway. And then I had a creamy or an ice cream and I kind of made it fit, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's fine, but you realize that that is also half effort. You're going to get half the results because people are too dogmatic that it's all about the calories. That couldn't be further from the truth. People that are preaching it's all about the calories need to go F off, because it's not. When it comes, like, I'm really sick of it because everybody says that, right? This scenario always goes back to, well, I made sure I was still at my calories. I'm like, yeah, but that changed your behavior, right? You actually reinforced a low dopamine state. So now it's going to be harder for me to get you to forget about that food, because nobody in their right mind knows or is going to tell me that ice cream is healthy for you, right? And I'm not saying you don't need to eat ice cream. I'm just saying at no point in time should things that raise dopamine, because almost all of them are junk food, should be a chronic staple in your weekly diet. You should be getting dopamine naturally from your environment. That's what I'm trying to highlight to people. Because dopamine is not just a reward, it's also a pattern recognition neurotransmitter, which tells me that you have a poor ability to think critically, right? And we know how far that's gotten a lot of people in the last 3 years. If you couldn't think critically, you got manipulated, right? And we all know what we're talking about, right? We know about the whole pandemic thing, the pandemic. But without getting too political,
this, let's dig into your decision to build your house away from everything that's impacting your place and whatnot. So, what city or urban life stressors are there to identify? What are the sources that can cause your body, so to speak, to not work for you, but starting to work against you? The things we already explained a little bit.
yeah. So let's dig into those. Let's dig into the main thing is this. The main thing about living in a city, there is the obvious, right? Of like, if your house or apartment building is next to a high amount of wireless communication, that is number one, right? And you can move to better places in the city and get better results. So that's number one. That includes cell phone towers, that includes radar facilities. So for example, hospitals, right? Because they almost always have helicopter landing pads. That means they're going to have some kind of radar attached to the roof. They're going to have some wireless communication devices attached to the roof, things of that nature. Airports are going to be kind of a no-go. You don't want to live next to an airport, things of that nature. And those are the big hitters of like right away. If you live next to these things, I can tell you, you're going to have an uphill struggle, even to the point where you already know that something is chronically wrong with you, but you haven't figured it out yet, right?
And I can relate to that because I was living next to the hospital. My sleep score were trash. And I would
Yeah,
like to see, now I have been away for quite a while. I need to do a follow-up blood test just to see how my alone is looking now because my progesterone and all these kind of things are just way off.
Yeah,
And that must have been the big hitter. And I also just recently saw a study about like air forces. They all have shorter lifespans than most people because they are exposed to all these things, all the radars and everything in there, and
yeah.
they are
And
at the highest risk of suicides.
Yep, yep. And this goes back to the exact conversation that I just said about dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline. Okay. Those, the reason why I highlighted those is because those, no, even if you're outside, even if you're in the middle of sun, those are an electromagnetic field. So think of it like this, right? If I have let's just use this water bottle right here. If this is a cell phone tower, right, and it's putting out an electromagnetic field, the electromagnetic field goes out just like what it would of a planet. It's like a big dome and bubble that goes out and around for about a mile or two, right? Inside of that, if your home is inside that 1 mile radius related to this cell phone tower, that electromagnetic field is acting just like the planet's electromagnetic field does to the solar wind. We all know this, right? Like there's electromagnetic storms that come from the sun, but the electromagnetic field of the planet protects you from it, right? It doesn't let it penetrate into the planet. Well, it's the same thing right here with the cell phone tower. The cell phone tower is literally repelling certain wavelengths of the sun that are beneficial to you, like UVA and UVB. You could, where there's devices that test this. There's devices that test actual UVA and UVB coming through the local environment. It's a meter that you shine up to the light, and it tells you exactly how much is coming through. I've done this test with one of my clients because he had some major health problems living next to some power lines, and he wanted to move just like a few blocks away. I'm like, yeah, that's going to get rid of that electromagnetic field because we can test that. But the environment you're moving to isn't gaining health benefits, right? I want you to move somewhere where you're going to get better and not just stop getting worse, right? And so I showed him, hey, inside of this city, this is the UV index. And then we drove 20 minutes outside of the city limits, showed him the UV index on the same day, only 20 minutes difference. UV index was 2 times higher. So the UV index inside his area that he wanted to live in was a 3. The UV index outside of the city was a 5. Okay, that's a huge difference. It's a huge difference, especially when you understand that the UV light is what's going to transform theta-alanine and tyrosine into your thyroid hormones, and then into melanin, and then into dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. So in other words, it's going to help you think straight. It's going to help you be good health outcomes in terms of mental health, right? And so what you just highlighted about Air Force pilots and things of that nature that are more predisposed to suicide and mental health problems, it's not surprising because they're around electromagnetic fields that even if they took off their clothes, they wouldn't make the appropriate amount of dopamine and adrenaline and noradrenaline because these electromagnetic fields prevent that from happening to some degree. And then, more importantly, they make you hypoxic. What does that mean? And we have a video on this where inside the mitochondria, oxygen is being pulled to the end, the cytochrome number 4, by the mitochondria's electromagnetic field of the ATPase. Well, what if there's an electromagnetic field outside of your body that's pretty powerful? Well, now the oxygen doesn't get pulled very efficiently to that small electromagnetic field inside the mitochondria. It gets pulled around to different places, and sometimes it doesn't interact. That makes you hypoxic at the mitochondrial level. It doesn't mean that you can't breathe.
Lethargic and all those kind of things in office.
Yes.
I think, for
Yeah.
example. So I was working in one of the office, and obviously I checked the radio frequencies and whatnot, and it was 260,000 micro units, and I was just not having good fun there. Like,
Yeah,
my
and you
sleep
can
was
sense it. You
like
can sense it. Yeah. Yeah. And most people, again, if you don't have the device, you don't really know what you're sensing, but you know you don't feel well. And so most people will be like, oh, I just need some coffee, or I just need to go for a walk. And they do kind of feel better, but they don't realize that the reason they feel better is because they left the environment that was causing the problem, right? They think it was just some kind of coincidence, and I went for a walk and I got a coffee and now I feel better. Oh, well, right? And then they go back and then it's several hours before they start feeling again. And it's because you got rid of the stimulus and then you got back into the stimulus, and it takes a little bit of time to ramp up. Now imagine if that's going on 24/7 inside of your apartment building that you live in, right? You're going to chronically be lethargic. You're going to chronically not want to really move very well because you're being basically killed from the inside out without you even knowing it.
Is there anything you can do in that type of office setting? For example, you're making a living and you have to go there 8 hours a day. What
Mhm.
else can you do apart from going out? Is there anything you can do at all?
Well, it depends, right? Like there are things you can do. Like number one, you can dress up, and you dress up in multiple layers of clothing, right? And the clothing, if it, you know, the reflective material that they use for like preserving heat, that also works both ways. It also reflects things from interacting on you. So people that work in the on electricity, linemen, high power line electricians, things of that nature, they know this, right? They have protective equipment that helps them against electromagnetic fields. It's not a 100% solve, but for somebody that works in that environment, it would definitely help, right? And that clothing has two key attributes. Number one, it usually has some kind of metal woven into the material, like silver or copper. And by the way, the military uses this for undergarments, right? Is a silver woven undergarments for their military. For this reason is one of the reasons. There are multiple reasons, but this is one of them. And then the other thing is most of that material is yellow, and the reason why it's yellow is because electromagnetic fields for modern communication devices are a subform of blue light. Okay, the complementary color on a color wheel of blue is yellow. That doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people unless you're an artist, but what it means is yellow neutralizes blue. That's what it means. So the garment color actually makes a huge difference. So most linemen and electricians wear undergarments that are yellow and made of this protective material that have interlayered silver. Now that would be like, I can tell you that that will help. That will help. And then layering up to the point where as little skin exposed to that as possible. And why do I say that? Because your skin is part of your brain, right? At a fetus level, your skin and your brain were one tissue, and then they separate, and then the skin goes around the brain and the rest of the body. It is wirelessly connected to your brain. So the more skin you have exposed in that environment, the faster your brain will go, hey, something's wrong, right? And it'll start to affect.
If you're working from home with 5 different screens, laptop, iPad, whatever, Wi-Fi router behind underneath your desk, sitting
That's an easy fix. That's an
sitting butt
easy
naked is not fun. You
yeah,
should
yeah.
wrap it up yourself.
Yeah, that's an easy fix. The reason is because you have control, right? You have control. You can literally hardwire your stuff, turn off your Wi-Fi, and now you've significantly reduced the electromagnetic field footprint there by a lot, by a lot. There are other things too, like opening up your windows or moving to an outside patio, especially, depending, this is more depending on where you live. Yeah, outside patio to do your work on your computer. Now you start circumventing a whole lot of other things when you start doing that, because now not only are you mitigating the risk, you're actually amplifying the thing that fixes it, which is sunlight and environmental exposure, right? Because your skin is meant to interact with the environment at every level. That's sunlight, that's cold, both of those. Any environmental stimulus, natural environmental stimulus, amplifies neurotransmitter production. In case you haven't noticed it, the reason why people like cold exposure, it bumps up dopamine, it bumps up noradrenaline, it bumps up your cortisol, it regulates those things. People have to ask themselves, well, why does it do that? It's because it's a natural response to a cold exposure event. Guess what else does those same things, but at a higher magnitude? Sunlight. Sunlight does that also. That's where sunlight is the primary runner of mammalian physiology, and cold is a secondary stimulus to mammalian physiology, because mammals have evolved in sunlight first and in cold second, after there was the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. After that big change to the planet happened, where we started to have ice ages regularly and 4 seasons regularly. That change is what propelled mammals to take over the planet because they could survive both in hot and cold. And the reason is because it's tied deeply to how POMC and our neurotransmitters and our sex hormones work with cold and with sunlight.
So living in a city, another thing would be like increased amount of time we sit, because hey, we're gonna go get to office, but we jump in a car. We're gonna go this, we jump in a train. We're gonna do this. And so how can you, first of all, what happens when you sit too much? Like when I did my studies in university and we did some research on professors, and anything over 4 hours completely mess their blood panel. The
Yeah.
cholesterol was going through the roof, and their insulin sensitivity went down, and many, many, many other things. So, what are the most common things you see from people who live in cities, related maybe to blood tests?
Mm-hmm. So the most common one, because people aren't dumb, right? Like people want to do things for themselves. So, even living inside of a city, more and more of my clients are like, oh well, I have a walking desk, right? And I walk a lot. And even with people that have a lot of steps, 10,000 steps, 13,000 steps, I still see aberrant thyroid and aberrant insulin sensitivity because of the things that I said earlier, right? Electromagnetic fields affect these at a major level, and they affect them chronically, right? No matter how much activity you're doing. That's why I said them first. Now, talking about being sedentary, right? You may actually have a decent job where, hey, I actually go to work and there isn't very many electromagnetic fields around, but I still live in a city that my work involves sitting as a clerk somewhere, right? Or as a driver, right? Like I have zero electromagnetic fields. I drive a bus or I drive a taxi, right? But I'm sitting all the time, right? And so that has other effects, and most of those effects have to do with energy substrates in the blood. So in other words, triglycerides and blood sugar, right? You're just not using your body to burn those up, right? You're supposed to be able to do that. For those people, a lot of the simple solves are taking breaks, right? Just taking breaks, right? Taking breaks, getting out, stretching, going for a little walk, 5 minutes, start with whatever you can. You don't even necessarily have to leave the building to start implementing this. You can literally walk down the hall, walk down a flight of stairs and come back, right? 5 minutes.
And would you
But
also time it for specific occurrences throughout the day? Let's say
yeah,
they have
yeah.
just
So one of the biggest ones,
up for 5 minutes.
yeah, yeah. One of the biggest ones I see is the afternoon crash, right? Almost every office worker experiences this. So this is where I program, hey, at 1 p.m., right? If they tell me that around 2 p.m. is where they experience this crash, at 1 p.m., I literally say, set an alarm. At 1 p.m., I want you to stand up and I want you to go outside, right? If you're in a building, that's going to take you 5 minutes to get outside. And once you're outside, all I want you to do is get bright light in your face. Get bright light in your face and just jump. Just jump once or twice, like as hard as you can up into the air. And immediately I'm like, and that's it. And they're like, that's it? I'm like, yeah, that's it. Then walk back up. What you've just done is
I
initiated.
rebounded.
Yeah. Is all you've done is bumped up your dopamine, bumped up your neurotransmitters, and bumped up your cortisol acutely, right? And those will have a residual effect for about an hour and a half. 2 o'clock will come around and you'll actually feel alert and ready to go. You won't have a crash. And that's a sedentary environment phenomenon, that you've just been sitting too long and your body is way too relaxed in terms of dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. Now, cortisol could be high if you're stressed, you're answering emails that are stressful and stuff like that. But if cortisol is high, but there isn't dopamine and noradrenaline to go along with it, you almost get into a panic state where you're just kind of frozen. You want the dopamine, you want the noradrenaline to come up. Most people fuel that with something in their mouth, right? They go, oh, I need some coffee. I need a frappe. I need something that goes in my mouth that gives me a little bit of a dopamine hit. And then that wakes them up. And I'm like, okay, well, fundamentally, that is correct. You needed some dopamine, but you don't have to get it from calories, right? You can just go and do this little circuit. You don't have to consume any calories. You get a dopamine hit that's going to last even longer than the food dopamine hit, because food dopamine is very short-lived. That's why you can eat some nice carbs, right, or ice cream or whatever, and like an hour later, you're like, yeah, I want some more.
And then you want to go up in a car.
Correct, right? So it's one of those things where it's very, if you know the neurotransmitters that are being manipulated, if you know the hormones that are being manipulated, you can use those for yourself and not against yourself. Right? Especially if you have body composition goals and things of that nature, or you just have blood work that's like, hey, I just need to clean up my diet. I need to clean up what I put in my mouth. So then we start leveraging things like that, right? So, and then the next thing is also very beneficial that you can kind of hack when you're living inside is I would not hesitate to make at least a weekly or bi-weekly picnic to a central park, to a park where there's just trees and grass and nature, right? Ideally, you live in a city that actually has something like that, I would hope. Because at a minimum, and I would vet them, right? Like, because you never know when they're going to put a cell phone tower right next to one of those damn things, right? And when they do that, you don't go to that one anymore. You go to another one.
About it, like where I go in Peak District, where there is no cell reception at all.
Yeah, yeah. Ideally, you make a trip just outside the city, right? You go to a park out there, you go to a recreation area out there, and you do whatever you want. Like, it could literally be, hey, I'm just going to pull up my lawn chair, and I'm just going to relax for the afternoon, and I'm going to have a little picnic with myself and my loved ones, or just by yourself, right? And you bring some healthy food with you, you eat it, you relax in some sunshine, and you decompress. The bigger the city that you live in, the more frequent you'll need to do that.
And you probably will benefit more from taking a book rather than your laptop with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's exactly what I say. I would try not to take a laptop, your phone maybe, but I would definitely, at least for an hour, put everything on airplane mode and take a nap. Like, it literally, like, most people that I see are underslept, overeating, and not getting enough sunshine. I'm like, the perfect solution to that is go take a nap in the sun, right? You will wake up very refreshed, and you might even be to the point where, like, you know what, I actually want to go for a nice run or a little jog and kind of get my heart rate up. You will feel different from a nap in the sun, I will tell you that. This sounds really, really basic, because it is, because physiology is being hijacked at the base level when you live in a city, and your whole life is screens, right? You're just looking at screens, you're just looking at phones, and you have very little interaction with the outside world other than through a window, right? When that's the life, you're basically circumventing baseline physiology at the mammal level, right? You're basically undoing evolution at that point. And that's
that
why
kind of lifestyle probably would bring as well to, because you're so lethargic and tired, now you are isolated because you don't have energy to even deal with people anymore, which brings to completely other issues, which is,
a lot of mental health stuff. Yep.
Like,
Yep.
I don't know if you saw a couple comments on our group where people were, I talk like, oh, this is great, but actually you can speak to somebody who understands what I'm going through,
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that's really what I try to highlight with the videos that we put out, right? What we talk about is pretty deep science, but we try to break it down to some level to be able to be understood that this is baseline stuff. If you start circumventing it, you run into issues. You can circumvent it for a little while and you're going to be totally fine. But if you don't realize that you're circumventing it, you end up circumventing it for a decade, and then you end up on all kinds of medications that you don't want to be on.
And it's bringing us back to the things that we are kind of emphasizing all the time. Basics work. Can't outsmart what's happening for thousands and thousands of years. Why we have gone so smart, so strong, and so on and so forth. Now we have been thrown into completely different environment. Hey, and maybe in 100 years or so, we're gonna be so adapted to this, we're gonna be even stronger and fitter and whatnot. But it has not happened yet. We know how to increase the thing we did about longevity, quality of life, by doing these little hacks that doesn't really require you to do everything completely different every single day. But if you can do it once a week, it's a billion times better than just trying to ignore it and trying to medicate yourself out of feeling lethargic, being overweight, being weak, and mentally exhausted.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And the more you do them, the more you realize it makes you feel good. The more it makes you feel good, you start reinforcing this pattern of, oh, this makes me feel good. It makes me think better. It makes me digest things better. And then you start thinking more critically about your lifestyle of like, do I really want to live this way, or do I want to change it, right? And that change could first start with losing weight or building muscle, and then eventually that change can lead to building a business that allows you to go wherever you want, or something along those, or go somewhere where you know that you'll feel better, right? Like, it starts opening up doors instead of closing them. Because I tell you one thing, when you go to the doctor and you get a prescription, and then you go to the doctor 6 months later and you get another prescription, and then you go to the doctor 6 months later and you get another prescription, that's closing doors. It is not opening doors, right? And people know this fundamentally, right? Like, when you keep going to the doctor and you just keep coming away with more prescriptions, you quickly start realizing, hey, I'm a hamster on this treadmill now. I have to go get this prescription filled, or I'm not going to feel well, or the doctor's telling me I'm going to have a shorter lifespan, which may or may not be true depending on what the prescriptions are. But what I'm getting at is, you quickly start feeling a little bit more trapped. And that is the truth. That is the truth. The more things you're relying on, the more trapped you are.
And let me try to summarize this, because the thing we are discussing is like, hey, these are the facts that they can affect you if you live anywhere, but they're more apparent in a city setting, and more often than not they are easily to fix. Is, hey, can you get yourself away from environments that affect you negatively? Recognize when you are more tired, when you are more fatigued, when you are more irritated, and maybe that is the environment. Have a journal and start writing it down. You know what, every day at such and such a time I don't feel my best. Where the hell am I at that point? Or what did I eat? Or whom did I communicate with? And then start to unwrap all that, and maybe change, like you said, patterns. Tony Robbins loves this. Recognize patterns, then change them, and maybe install completely new ones. Because without doing that, you cannot improve your physical and mental well-being. It's just not going to happen.
Correct. Yeah, that's a great summary. It's a great summary, right? There's a little bit more details there on the neurotransmitters that allow you to recognize patterns and where they come from. But that's crucial to know, right? Hey, if I'm having a problem thinking straight, if I'm having a problem with mental stuff or fatigue, or I just kind of get brain fog and I can't really think very well, the first thing I need to do is I need to get more dopamine in me. I need to get more noradrenaline and adrenaline in me. What is the fundamental thing that's going to make those? Outside. It's not found in a cup. It's not found in a pill. It's outside.
Awesome, David. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you next video.
All right. Thank you.